If you're Gen X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980, you're probably feeling it right now. You've put in the years, you've climbed the ladder, you've survived recessions, maybe navigated multiple economic cycles, and perhaps even a few corporate restructurings. Yet in 2026, landing a solid role and even keeping the one that you've got can feel even harder than ever. You're not imagining it. The job market isn't just tough, it's disproportionately brutal for us. Longer stretches of unemployment, subtle and maybe not so subtle ageism. AI is reshaping roles that we once owned, and a sandwich generation squeeze that can drain our energy and our savings. While things have changed, it isn't hopeless, but we may need to pivot and change how we do things. Today, we're going to talk about why 2026 is hitting Gen X especially hard and take a clear look at the reality of ageism in today's market. And importantly, I want you to know that there are measures that you can take to address this. We'll dig deeper into those practical moves in part 2 of this series next week. Stick around. This could help shape your next steps. My name is Doug, a recruiter, a career coach, and a business leader who's helped thousands of people navigate complex job markets and today's changing world of work. Much of my work these days is helping people in their mid to late career make smart moves in this stage of their career. If you want deeper help with your job search, maybe strategy, or staying relevant, I've got courses, coaching, and a free resource to get you started linked down below. Let's dig in. So why is it so tough right now? Let's take a look at some harsh realities and start with some data. In early 2026, U.S. unemployment hovers around 4.3%, or at least that's the number that they want us to focus on. Factoring in the number of people who are underemployed or who are working multiple jobs or who have maybe even dropped out of the job market altogether, that number climbs. But for workers in that 50 to 64 range, that's peak Gen X or early boomers, long-term unemployment is spiking. Older workers are jobless for an average of 26 weeks after a layoff, which is way longer than those under 35. And 24% of Gen Xers and boomers laid off in recent years have not landed another full-time gig. Ageism is real and it's rampant. Surveys show that 60 to 64% of workers 50 plus have either experienced it or witnessed it. Glassdoor mentions of age bias have surged 130% in recent years. Employers assume that we're set in our ways, less tech savvy, or maybe too expensive. Stereotypes that ignore our deep experience and our reliability. And let's be honest here, at times, ageism can be directly related to ego and a manager who may be threatened by you. As many of you know, we've also been called the sandwich generation. But what does that have to do with all of this? Well, many of us have been balancing helping out to support both adult children and aging parents. That financial and emotional load can leave really little room for upskilling or perhaps relocating or maybe even taking risks. At the same time, AI is accelerating changes. Layoffs in recent years that were often tied to what they anticipated as a gain from AI have thinned white-collar mid-level roles in like tech, finance, and operations, some of those areas where Gen X actually held strong positions. But here's the irony. Many of those companies are now realizing that the cuts may have been premature because AI hasn't really delivered entirely on what it promised. But at this point, the damage is really already done from those cutbacks. On top of all of this, Gen X has got competition in the job market from all sides. Boomers delaying retirement due to the cost of living. That is, if they're not downsized, Gen Z is entering in volume, and millennials are kind of holding up that middle. Gen X gets caught in the squeeze because they're too experienced for junior roles, sometimes overlooked for fresh talent in a trendy role. Retirement timelines are shifting too. Nearly 70% of Gen X expect to need to work longer than planned because of inflation, savings gaps, or this economic uncertainty. I know this sounds a bit harsh, but is this the end? No, I don't believe so. But what I do believe is that we need to have our eyes wide open and consider how we either position or reposition ourselves. I believe that the Gen X workers and professionals who are positioning themselves to win right now are not necessarily the most qualified on paper. They're the ones who are adjusting how they think about the market and how they show up in it. And this is where I want to draw your attention to something important. There are practical steps that we can take and ways to counter what's happening. There are adjustments that can really help us to regain some traction. And there are steps that we can take to try and reduce the impact of age bias or ageism. But before we dig into some tactics, we have to acknowledge the landscape and clearly and honestly observe it, because you can't navigate in a market that you don't fully or even partially understand. What I'm seeing right now, both in the data and with professionals that I've worked with, is this. Ageism in 2026 is often more subtle than it used to be. It doesn't always show up in overt discrimination. Often it kind of shows up in coded language or slower response times, or being told you're not quite the right fit, or maybe even seeing roles quietly skew younger in tone and even branding. And here's the key insight. Because the bias is often indirect, the response strategy has to be intentional and strategic, not just reactive. Next week in part 2, we'll dive into just that. We're going to dig into several very specific measures that you can take to better position yourself, counter that ageism, and create forward momentum in this market. For now, I want to leave you with this one question to consider. Where is your experience still valuable, but just not coming across that way yet? Because Gen X, 2026 is tough, but it's also our opportunity to redefine success with the wisdom that we've earned. The market may favor youth in some areas, but it still desperately needs experienced people who deliver results. That's you and I. And in part 2, we're going to talk about some key ways to position yourself to be seen in this market. If this resonates with you, drop a comment down below and tell me about your experience and what you've learned. I'd love to hear from you. And if you found this helpful, hit that like button, subscribe, and maybe even share the video. And once again, if you're looking for more direct help in your job search, check out the link to my website down in the description. Until next time.